Creative research, courageous research, building mattering maps and meaningful knowledge. This keynote address was delivered by Tara Brabazon for the Indonesia University of Education. I commence today's talk with one question. What matters? So often in our academic careers, we teach, we research, we read, we write, we think. But how rarely do we think about what matters? And that's my task for today. I want to explore how we as education researchers manage the proliferation of platforms and interfaces, while also exploring how these multiple mediated environments impact on our identity and position as researchers, and also to our mattering. But I start with a story. Let's go back. I am 28 years of age and sitting in a university higher degree committee as a faculty representative. 3 examiner reports are being discussed by this committee for a performance-based PhD. The results were a B, minor corrections, a D, restructure and examination, and an F. Yes, a fail. The thesis was composed of an artefact and exegesis. It was a live performance and a 40,000 words research frame to contextualise it. The examiners were sent a video of the performance, and the D and the F results offered a commentary about the quality, or lack thereof, of the video recording. Also, the exegesis appeared to retell the script of the performance rather than explore why and how this performance created new knowledge. The quality of the art is actually, of course, irrelevant. Where was the research? What was the object of discussion? How was originality created, proven, and verified through such a doctoral thesis? It was a mess. And because of the nature of the performance, how was it possible to recreate an event in a way that would satisfy examiners? How could a thesis such as this be re-examined as required by one of the 3 examiners? Now, I was a young researcher, an early career researcher, and I was given this incredible opportunity as a young woman on a university-level governance committee. I was inexperienced, and it was a privilege to be learning from more weathered colleagues. But there was no resolution from these senior academics, all gathered from an array of disciplines. Okay, let's cut to a decade later, and I'm 38 years of age. A PhD student has been bounced around the University of Brighton, where I am the chair of media. Supervisors had walked away from the project as if the student was carrying a contagious airborne disease. Her 4 films had been demeaned and dismissed as lacking quality. The exegesis had remained unread, but of course the exegesis explained the nature of the films and the research within them. As the document had never been read, the films were being evaluated through profoundly subjective criteria. Her institutional PhD file was thick with commentary from research managers questioning the quality of her art. The student, of course, had a different purpose and inflection. The candidate had written the thesis with a very clear framework around the films, and these visual and sonic objects were not self-standing works of art. They were sonic and visual artefacts that summoned ways of thinking. But even with my leverage as a professor, I couldn't support this student through completion at this particular university. Instead, she had to exit from that university, enroll in another university, and submit. And when she did so, she passed through the examination process with ridiculous ease, without caveats, without corrections. Therefore, the research leadership at that time was incompetent and was wrong, and there were consequences to their errors. That student could have walked away, simply been another statistic for our overwhelmingly shameful attrition figures in international doctoral education. But in this case, unsubstantiated statements about art were used to demean a student and her research. Now, a great outcome was reached through the conflictual interpretations of cultural value, but she had to leave one institution and submit at another. Okay, so the clock hands circle one more decade. I am 48 and a Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University. So PhD students, their admission, their candidature, their examination, that's now my responsibility, my focus and my priority. Once more, I see the soap opera of assumptions and errors and flaws and debates about quality in the discussion of creative-led theses. The difference this time is I can actually do something about it. What has been revealed through my academic career is that silos of creatives have been built, and these silos have been filled with overconfidence and dated assumptions about art and cultural value. The research has been lost through the propulsive focus to create art, and there's all sorts of proxies that show these problems exist. Long candidatures, mental health issues from students, multiple changes in supervision, and yes, attrition. But the goal remains: blame the student for the failure. Each individual student is supposedly to blame for their own inability to complete, rather than having a think about the institution, the supervisor, or the system. The individualisation of student blame needs to change, and it needs to change today. I am so thrilled to have received your humbling invitation to speak with you today during this period of profound liminality and challenge for the world, of catastrophic wars, absolute environmental crisis, and a deep questioning about the point and the purpose of a university. So today I hope we move from meaning and mattering, from text to context, so that together we can summon a different future. This presentation commences with the problems and challenges that emerge when we use the word creative, particularly when it's used as an adjective or as an adverb in research. And what we're trying to do is manage and mediate this challenge with creative research by summoning alternative tropes and theories to build courageous research. Let's explore how discussions of art and creativity are rendered more meaningful and rigorous when we summon multimodality. Then let's explore how the notion of the creative researcher is transformed through a discussion of positionality, honest and rigorous discussions of our identity as researchers. We conclude by aligning the self and society, creativity and courage through summoning mattering, the mattering of research, and yes, the mattering as researchers. My presentation today has 4 parts. Firstly, we explore creative research. Secondly, we probe multimodality. Thirdly, positionality. And finally, what matters. We enter the sphere of mattering. But let's commence with part 1. What is creative research? So often, too often, there's a pull between creating art and building research. I see this as an inelegant and unhelpful binary opposition. The artifact exegesis model of doctoral education attempts to transcend and transform this pull between the creative and research. The artifact exegesis mode of doctorate often has a very unstable pathway through examination, as we discussed at the start of this keynote, because expectations are not clear, and they're not clear for students or supervisors or examiners. And so this means that split decisions, divergent results are frequent in this mode of PhD. So to manage this ambiguity, I change the language through which we describe this mode of doctorate. Now, at Flinders, when I was Dean, we changed the language and we described it as an artefact and exegesis thesis. That is a mode of doctorate, rather than using methodology such as practice-led, practice-based, creative-led, creative-based, because methodology alone is not research. It is, alongside epistemology and ontology, one part of any research project. Therefore, I use the artefact and exegesis description, and I note it as a mode of doctorate. Now, fascinatingly, once this change was made, the artefact and exegesis mode of doctorate then suddenly started to appear in all 6 colleges at Flinders, including science and engineering, medicine, nursing, allied health, and of course, education. So this was not arts-based research. It was a mode of doctorate that is used strongly in the arts-based disciplines, but is also deployed through all subjects and all disciplines. Now, the challenge is the word creative is so ambiguous in its meaning that it's useless. It's replaced, I would argue, Raymond Williams' description of culture as one of the 2 or 3 most complex words in the language. And let's be honest, the word creative is used to justify a range of behaviours that can be the antithesis of what's required in research and scholarship. Assumptions about cultural value, assumptions about quality, assumptions about art. And those assumptions replace discussions about the relationship between methodology, ontology, and epistemology. Therefore, creativity in research must exist in a systematic, predictable, and iterative fashion. The methodologies to study creativity require understanding the 3 Ds of technology: digitisation, disintermediation, and deterritorialisation, and also uneven globalisation. Creativity is always socio-cultural, involving new learning, new knowledge, new ways of teaching, new ways of creating research. Now, Szabo described this as the, quote, creative ecologies model, end of quote. Excellent. So creativity through research builds, supports, and shares systems of change. But I do want to widen out this discussion. This is not simply an issue of creative arts. You may know I've spent a lot of my life fighting these assumptions about high culture, assumptions about art, assumptions about cultural quality. So the artefact can be in written form, it can be a novel or novella, it can be poetry, it can be a script, it can involve design, from architecture to technological design to graphic or interior design, to name a few areas. The sonic artefact can refer to sonic architecture, sonic art, popular music, podcasts, and of course the visual, fine art, film, screen arts, or mixed media installations. Therefore, the diversity of the artefact can be staggering and important to log. But there is a reason, a powerful reason, why this mode of research exists and why it must continue to exist. You see, more conventional research methods cannot answer specific research questions. So when I used to teach creative and practice-led research methods, I used to use the following analogy. We must only use creative-led methods when we have to. So, in other words, conventional research can only take us so far. So we need to make a leap. We need to make a jump to the next stage of research beyond what a logical or a cumulative method of knowledge generation could do for us. So yes, we complete our literature review, we have strong research questions, we know the limitations of knowledge, but then we need to create an original contribution to knowledge. So we need to use the artefact to get us ahead of where the research is currently positioned. Now, I've always described this through the metaphor of throwing a rock into a pond. So existing knowledge, our literature review, gets us to the edge of the water. The artifact that we throw into the pond throws knowledge ahead through the momentum granted to the object. But then the goal of the exegesis, the explanation, is to connect the shoreline where we are, the limitations of knowledge, with the object thrown in advance of knowledge. So it is a surprising, volatile, exciting mode of research, and it does move knowledge forward in interesting and unpredictable ways, and that's why we do it. But we also have to ensure the rigours of research: accountability, transparency, repeatability. And that's why the word creative is so constricting and damaging. The assumption is that the artifact is art, and that art is intrinsically knowledge. No. Actually, the object is just an object. We have to prove, frame, and shape the research around it. So I need to be really clear here. A film is just a film. It's not research. A novel is just a novel. It's not research. A design is just a design. It's not research. So if we want to make a film or write a novel or construct a design, that's terrific. But it doesn't mean we're going to get a PhD or research out of it. And that's why words like art and creativity can be seriously obstructionary, because there's no intrinsic quality in the artifact. And even if there was, that has nothing to do with research. So now that we've discussed creativity and research and the growing relationship between the artifact and the exegesis, let's look at how we can do this properly. How we build relationships in education between form and content, platform and meaning, and we explore these diverse interfaces in our lives. So this means that education research can transform and enhance how we construct research and teaching objects and how they are interpreted. Therefore, let's discuss a key concept in enlivening the decisions that we make about interfaces, media, and platforms. And that's my second section, multimodality. How do we decide which platform to use for what sort of information we need to convey? How much of our learning design, our assessment design, is automated into a learning management system? Today, therefore, I'd ask that we just pause and we reflect on the relationship between knowledge, platform, and audience. So when do we decide in life, I'm going to post a photograph on Instagram? When do I decide I'm going to record a podcast? I'm going to record a vlog? When do we hold a meeting? Or when do we quite rightly say a meeting is not required, an email can do the job? Now, the answer to all of these questions, and I would argue the answer to some of the most important discussions we need to be having about learning and teaching and literacies and citizenship, involve multimodality. But to get there, we have to understand empowered institutions like universities and how we in universities make decisions about educational media, teaching and research objects. So multimodality is part of media literacy. And if I could present it visually, information is like a big circle. Information literacy is within that circle. And then media literacy is part of information literacy, and multimodality is part of media literacy. So let's provide a quick definition of multimodality. Very simple. Multi means many. Mode means form or platform or way or channel of expressing ideas. And ality exists in multimodality, physicality, corporeality. It's the bit that comes after the word that describes the condition of the word. So physicality, the state of being physical. Multimodality, the state or condition of being multimodal. multimodal. So the word refers to the many platforms and channels that are now the very nature of our reality, our way of experiencing information, life, ideas. It recognises that digital material can move very easily through space and time and diverse platforms. The digital material can live on these diverse platforms, but this technological determinism is truncating our andragogical decisions about the alignments of form and content, media and learning materials. So as you can see, there is a powerful consequence of thinking about multimodality, and that involves, particularly in higher education, the building of an information scaffold. So an information scaffold is like a ladder. We take one step and then another and then another, and it gets us to where we need to go. Put another way, it takes a mode of knowledge that is expressed on a platform where we already have literacy, and through multimodality, we're able to move that information to different platforms. We recognise our strengths, our weaknesses, and we can move ourselves from everyday literacies to critical literacies. So we take our already existing expertise in one mode or platform and we build on it. And that's why I very rarely use the phrase new media, because of course it suggests that media is new. It's not. Every media platform is based on a past media platform. Every literacy is based on a past literacy. So multimodality allows us to take one set of skills and abilities and understand how they're used in one mode and then move them to another. Multimodality enables all of us to understand how to operate in a multi-platform environment. It enables us to move between platforms with clarity and consciousness. But it also enables us to work on our media literacy and information literacy, so we know our strengths in one platform, and our goal is then to move between platforms with literacy, using the skills we've developed on one platform to develop new skills in another. Great. But most importantly, multimodality is probably the most valuable skill in existence for teachers, because it allows us to select which platform is best for a particular shard of information to connect with a particular group of students. Multimodality allows us to make informed choices about which platform will most effectively reach an audience, including a particular cohort of students, to convey a shard of information. So multimodality in visual communication places attention on images, on language, on font, on white space, on colour. With sonic media, it's the use of melody or harmony or rhythm or silence or talk or language or pitch. Modality confirms how particular signifying practices within a text determines the limits of what is real or true or normal. Now, multimodality recognises that there are multiple realities and truths and normalities, and if we mismatch platform, information and audience, then communication won't work and learning won't work. So if we translate that into our context in universities, if we mismatch platform, information and audience, then learning does not take place. Multimodality creates awareness of the multiple realities that are available to be accessed on all these different platforms and interfaces in our lives. Multimodality proves the medium is not the message. Multimodality is determined not by the form, the signifier, the medium, but our interpretation of the form. So the medium is not the message. Every signifier, media, has multiple signifieds, content, and our reality, what we believe to be true, is based on our interpretation of signifiers. So we always ask, what is the most effective platform? What is the best way to convey this information? And the late Gunther Kress was the key theorist of multimodality. And it's important that we remember his legacy in academic history. He built social semiotics with Robert Hodge through the 1980s, and in the 1990s he became fascinated with how images work. Now, through the 2000s, multimodality became his focus, and he was terribly interested in what is the best media platform for specific audiences. So when should we use images? When should we use text? And why this matters is Gunther Kress specialised in education, and he spent a lot of his career talking about children's education. And yes, he placed a lot of attention on creativity. But unlike many of the scholars in my first section, Gunther Kress explored multimodality as a strategy to teach creativity. He was interested in the role of visual communication in learning. So multimodality particularly matters now because of globalisation, because all our digital texts can move so easily through national borders. Gunther Kress, therefore, realised a pivotal maxim. He argued the greater the cultural difference, the greater the differences in terms of representational systems and literacies in the audience. Therefore, as university teachers, we cannot assume that our understanding of information, our information literacy, our media literacy is shared with our students. We need the resources and the skills to target the communication systems and a mode of knowledge for very specific groups. So what works in our universities may not work outside of universities. And indeed, what we think works inside universities may not work inside universities. But if a text or an object is to hold meaning in teaching or in research, then there's got to be attention to the researcher, who we are. How do we interpret? How do we analyse? How do we rank? How do we value? So we spent the first two sections of this talk exploring creative research, alignments of artefacts and exegeses, then probing multimodality to enable that matching. But our task now is to look in the mirror, add the researcher to the research, and add the context to the content. My third stop is positionality. At its most basic, positionality is a recognition of the social and political context that creates our identity. The marked sociological variables are obviously particularly noted. So, class, race, gender, sexuality, age, ability and disability. Okay. But you see, there is a second stage to positionality. It probes how these identity markers influence, shape and craft our view of the world. Now, in some ideologies, some methodologies, this is referred to as bias. Some scholars refer to it as a lens. Positionality links who we are with how we think about the world. So positionality is part of epistemology. Epistemology at its most basic probes how we know what we know. Positionality has been used as a word for nearly a century, emerging in the mid-1920s in research. But at that time, it was not a label about identity or social or political relationships. It referred to how things exist in space in relation to other things. So positionality as in position. Through the 1960s, the progressive social movements combined with particular social science disciplines like sociology and anthropology, and it probed if a scholar's identity altered or shaped how they viewed or how they understood phenomena. Put another way, how does our social position impact on the research? Now that is positionality. Positionality asks all of us as scholars to understand, but also to reflect on and then present to our peers, to our readers, how that identity has shaped our interpretation. Positionality is used most frequently by, obviously, qualitative researchers. We see it a great deal in the social sciences. Now, through the 2010s, positionality broadened through the disciplines and the methodological approaches. But the argument is a sound one, that the position adopted by the researcher affects the phases of the research process. How the problem or question is found, named, expressed, designed and constructed is involved in this positionality discussion. How are the methods selected? How are people asked to participate? How is knowledge constructed? How are the research outcomes configured? And of course, multimodality, how is the research disseminated? These questions operate in all disciplines. So, for example, why in a physics PhD is a student working in that particular area? And if your supervisor chose it, why did the student choose that supervisor? What is it about agitated materials or carbon nanotubes that fascinates you? Or if you're conducting a funded research, say on beef consumption, funded by a supermarket, how does that funding position impact on you and your research? So this is not simply a question of identity. It's about a relationship with information, a relationship with a discipline, a relationship with objects, artifacts, and a community. Now, in the old days, 20 years ago, there'd be a mandatory, if dull, session in research training on insider and outsider status. Now, maybe because I've read too much Homi Bhabha, I'm always interested in the spaces between these pretty basic binary oppositions, because no one is simply an insider or an outsider. But how insiders and outsiders were taught in pretty basic applied social science methodologies is, of course, an insider is a researcher or participant that works for or within a participant community. The outsider is the academic researcher and seen as a non-member of the community. Okay, well, thankfully, Herr and Anderson moved us way beyond this insider-outsider stuff, and they created 6 nodes along the insider-outsider continuum in their powerful book on action research. So the first step is the insider. The research studies their own communities, their own practices. The second step is the insider collaborates with other insiders. Stage 3, we start to get some movement. Insiders collaborate with outsiders. Stage 4 is what's often called reciprocal collaboration, co-design, if you will. So the insider and the outsider are teams and they're equal in their status. Stage 5, outsiders collaborate with insiders in a non-equal, non-equivalent relationship. And of course, stage 6 is outsider status. Now, this was brilliant research. It was also incredibly shocking at the time because it made all of us as researchers confront the truth that we spend the bulk of our time as insiders investigating our own insider practices and communities. Action research, by the way, particularly in education, is located in Node 1. We are researching our own practice. Stage 6 is where we as researchers gather data sets where we objectify the research subjects. So Herr and Anderson did the intellectual community a great service. So we use the word reflection a lot, reflective a lot, and I think too often, particularly in research, the word reflection is an excuse for someone to just talk about themselves. And while the most robust and advanced modelling of positionality emerges from feminist ethnographers, I would argue, all of us gain through thinking about the power that we hold and the intentions that we maintain when we come into a research project. And further, let's not just think about power and intentions, but how power and intentions transform research design, research questions, methodology, epistemology, ontology, and yes, our decisions about research dissemination. So we as researchers, we have the power to move. We have the power to change. Now, often our participants or our collaborators, no matter how close those relationships may be, do not have the power to move, do not have the power to change. So positionality is now reaching a new level of complexity. I wanted to therefore log the remarkable Anissa Jaffar's intervention in the very foundational definitions of positionality, and she explores how positionality exists in quantitative studies. She argues that without a discussion of positionality, quantitative research is not managing bias and therefore undermines the trope of validity. Wow. So with the intention of measuring and testing and proving, the issue is how positionality bias creates distortion in data sets. So if you think about it, in the medical sciences, she explores how objects that may appear to have an objective meaning change as they move through different contexts. And she is aware of the scale of her revisionism. She states that positionality, quote, challenges the quantitative approach to validity and suggests that in order to know what is really being measured, it is essential to know in more detail who is doing the measuring, end of quote. So where I was profoundly convinced by her analysis, profoundly, is her comment that when discussions of positionality don't reach the page, the audience of readers is not given the opportunity to assess how important these variables are, with consequences to the research validity and indeed the conclusions. So this matters obviously for mixed methods as well, and therefore a discussion of positionality is crucial to all scholars in all disciplines. Positionality is brilliant because it recognises that all researchers, who we are, that's part of the research that we do. We're not dispassionate, we're not viewing this information from the sidelines. We've all had big, full, complex lives before we came to the research. Positionality is therefore integral to any ethical discussion. It is integral to the selection of a research design and research methods. Luis Sanchez captured the scale of this role best, stating, quote, positionality is the notion that personal views, values, and locations in time and space influence how one understands the world. Positions act on the knowledge a person has about things, both material and abstract. Consequently, knowledge is a product of a specific position that reflects particular places and spaces. End of quote. So whether we are a quant or a qual researcher or we operate through mixed methods, positionality helps us by asking us to think about the stories that we tell ourselves and the impact on the people and the topics that we study. How do we choose our variables? How do we aggregate our categories? How do we data cleanse outsiders? In answer to this question, we finish off our gig today by exploring how our positionality as researchers enables our mattering as intellectuals. You see, we've probed today texts and textual systems and how they become research objects. We've explored creativity as a word and how it can block concrete discussions of research and cultural value. We've shown how multimodality increases the rigour in our understanding of platforms and interfaces and the meanings that we gain from them. And we've probed who we are, how our positioning is not neutral or objective, but very transformative of the research we create. So therefore, let's finish with mattering, why any of this discussion actually matters. Part 4, Mattering Maps and the Future of Educational Research. Educational research in a time of ChatGPT, Andrew Tate and Donald Trump is being challenged on all sides. And I ask a question of us all today. To what extent have you ever been made to feel that you are invisible? This question, of course, comes from the Fletch research on his anti-mattering scale. It is used to measure a researcher's sense of significance, not your significance actually, but your sense of significance. And that significance to your family, to your intimate partner, to your workplace, to your university, to your leisure group, like a bowling league or an orchid society or a local hockey team. But also the mattering in a wider community or society. George Eliot, a sociologist based at Brown University, defined mattering as having three parts: awareness, importance, and reliance. Awareness refers to if people give you attention or they walk past you. Importance describes if people care about your well-being. And reliance refers to, are there people that come to you for advice or help or support? Mattering is a proxy for our engagement with our communities. Isaac Predlensky, a community psychologist at the University of Miami, argued that our life should be considered in separate domains, and the mattering in each of these domains is really important. Self, relationships, work, paid and unpaid, but also community. Predlensky described this as middles, M-I-D-L-S, mattering in domains of life scale, and argued that it is important that we are appreciated. It is important that we contribute to the well-being of others. We feel that we matter and we enable others to matter. So once we know we matter, we centre ourselves, we produce research that matters when we know that we matter. Now, I've spent probably 15 years of my 30-year academic career bouncing around the expectations of other people. And often these other people were cruel, bullying, aggressive, certainly self-absorbed, and they would crawl over broken bodies to get on in their life and their career. These people endlessly try and push us out of our lane in life, and they do a lot of damage. But if we can sit in the quiet knowledge that we matter, and this mattering is not dependent on anyone else's views, then we're calm. We're driven by evidence and not emotion. The characteristic of our time is everything sort of seems heightened. It's important to be important. It's important to be visible, to gather up the likes and the loves on social media. Being a scholar, being an intellectual is not important. Being an influencer is important. But if we can authentically value our present, all the suffering, all the pain, all the loss, and recognise that this survival has meaning, and that we matter because of it, then our research transforms. There's a lot of talk at the moment about self-care, but we confirm our mattering every day when we make a decision to listen, to take a step forward and create routines to produce meaningful research. In these loud and often disrespectful times, let's validate the quiet, the listening. Let's focus. Let's turn down the commentary and maintain our momentum and meaning in our research. As we all move to the next stage and the next moment in our research lives, I thank you for walking with me through this presentation today. You matter. Your goals matter. And you enable the mattering of others.